Good evening. Is this working? Yes. I want to talk about a couple of trouble lawyers myself. And I'll start by telling you that several weeks ago, I witnessed something which for me, was a small miracle. It was something that, when I was a public defender 25 years ago, I would never have imagined could occur. And let me tell you what it was. The lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal was talking about Brady. I mean, I'm talking the lead editorial of the Wall Street Journal was complaining that prosecutors were not fulfilling their obligation to turn over exculpatory evidence to defense attorneys. I'm talking the Wall Street Journal. Now, it is a bit of a miracle to think that I read the Wall Street Journal every day. 25 years ago, I would never guess that would be how I began my morning. So that's a miracle in and of itself. But the true miracle for me was this. I wasn't witnessing public defenders in some blue-collar courtroom representing poor people screaming about Brady. It wasn't just about some public defenders and their clients begging the judge to make the government fulfill their responsibilities pursuant to Brady. And it wasn't just about those same lawyers and those same clients being told by judges, counsel, I believe the government understands its obligations pursuant to Brady. Now, case closed. Next question. It wasn't that. What I witnessed was, again, the Wall Street Journal, voices of power speaking truth to power. And what they were saying in that editorial was, government, you're not playing fair, and you're not going to get away with it. Now, I am the very first to admit that there are scores of lawyers, in my view, principally public defenders and principally lawyers that represent poor people, that have every right to claim credit for the fact that we are talking about issues like Brady in the Wall Street Journal. There's no question about that. Lawyers have toiled for years to get prosecutors to be made to pay for their violations of the Brady rule. So many of us can claim credit. However, having said that, I absolutely believe, and there's no doubt in my mind, that the recent and current attention to Brady is in large part due to the efforts of Brenden Sullivan, Cary, and their remarkable team in their representation of the late Senator Stevens, right here in D.C. Now, we know that the Williams and Cary team represented Senator Stevens in a criminal case where he was alleged to have made false statements to the government. And the short story is that at the end of the day, the government found itself having to dismiss the case and vacate his convictions because of findings of prosecutorial misconduct. That's the short story. But I'm here to tell you that the decision and the need to dismiss that case was prompted by the work of that team of lawyers. In other words, the discovery of that misconduct was not by happenstance. It was the result of the relentless pressure that the Williams and Connolly team imposed on the government and their efforts to secure exculpatory evidence. It was their refusal to accept the government's assurances that there was no Brady to be had in that case. Put aside, if you will, all of the written correspondence, the in-person meetings, the telephone conversations that those lawyers had with the prosecutors and their efforts to get Brady disclosed. Put that aside. If you take a look at the docket in that case, you will observe that there were no less than 9 motions filed by that team to dismiss the case or to compel discovery because of the government's Brady violations. There were over a dozen in-court hearings to address the issue of Brady violations alone. And those pleadings and those hearings largely took place in a window of about 2.5 months. It was that pressure by the Williams and Cary team that gave life to what proved to be literally mind-blowing post-conviction revelations about the government's misconduct. And revelations that included a government witness that testified that the testimony he provided at trial was perjured and that the prosecutors knew. A post-conviction disclosure by an investigator on the government's team that testified, filed a complaint, a whistleblower complaint, that he observed the government making false statements in open court to the court in response to issues related to their Brady obligations. Those disclosures, draped with the pattern of misconduct that the Williams and Cary team day in and day out ferreted out, proved absolutely critical. At the end of the day, the trial court, Judge Sullivan was fed up, and he agreed. And the government, clearly seeing the writing on the wall, and undoubtedly knowing that they were about to receive a stern response from the court, cried uncle and dismissed the case with prejudice. Thankfully, that occurred before Senator Stevens' death, but it did not occur soon enough to prevent the loss of his Senate seat. You know, over the years, and this is sad, I have seen big-time, white-collar criminal defense attorneys from major law firms, not all of them former prosecutors, but some of them. I've seen them accept without hesitation the government's word on the issue of Brady. I guess they're all in the same club. Well, not Brenden Sullivan, and not Rob Cary. They took that big stick of Williams Connolly, and on behalf of the entire criminal defense community, I thank each and every one of you for not being afraid to use it. Congratulations, Brenden.
Anybody who's ever been to court, so many of them here in this room, knows that you don't do anything alone today in the law. You cannot function without the brilliance of a team like this. Please stand up. Williams and Connolly team. Note that they're quite young. Why would we put such a young team on a case of a United States Senator? Well, because we didn't believe they'd indict this senator. So we reached out to the available. And this was the team that made a difference. I want to say to Michele, I've looked up to Michele for decades in this town, and part of the honor of being here tonight is to be introduced by you. She's the real thing in the courts of our land. Look, we become lawyers because I think basically deep down we cannot tolerate injustice. And hopefully we use our skills to prevent it. But it does happen. Sometimes I see injustice up close. I even struggle on occasion to avoid tears. It happens to me every year when I attend the Innocent Project fundraiser in New York City. At that function, they traditionally parade up onto the stage 15 or 20 persons, mostly minority, mostly black men, mostly poor people, some women occasionally. And they parade them up and they stand in a line and they have a microphone and they pass it down through each person's hands. And each one of them says words to this effect. I served 27 years in Lompoc prison for a crime I did not commit. And the microphone is passed to the next one, and to the next one. And 20 people later, the emotional impact brings me to tears. Many of the wrongful convictions were triggered by Brady failures. Our team experienced injustice. Our client was one of the most decent person I've ever met. I never knew him before the charges. He touched the lives of millions of people in this country through 40 years of public service. He was a true war hero who volunteered to fly airplanes in dangerous conditions in World War II when most of those pilots never thought they'd see home again. And prosecutors made a poor judgment to indict him. And then when it occurred to these prosecutors they could possibly lose this case, they violated the Constitution, they violated the Supreme Court's decision in Brady because they feared losing. They failed to produce Brady material which contradicted their key witness in the most explosive testimony in the case. And a jury verdict of guilty was returned. Thankfully, it lingered only for 5 months until the case was dismissed by Judge Sullivan, working with his brilliant law clerk round the clock, Addie Schmidt, at the request of the Attorney General of the United States. The day after the dismissal, General Holder went to the same courthouse. He swore in a new group of assistant U.S. attorneys the very day after the dismissal. And he said as follows, quote, "Your job is not to convict people. Your job is not to win cases. Your job is to do justice." I hope they follow his admonition. But I know for a fact that some were not listening. If this can happen to a powerful United States senator, defended by experienced lawyers, in the heart of our nation's capital, in a federal court known for its excellence, it can happen to anyone, anywhere. To you, your children, your family members. That injustice was rectified quickly by Judge Sullivan, who'd been a trial judge for 20 years in Superior Court and in the federal courts, and his laser-like instincts for fairness. He said early on in the case to the whole assembled group, before we even knew there was a hint of trouble, "You will get a fair trial in my courtroom." Part of the credit is due as well to a new set of prosecutors that arrived on the scene. Instead of protecting the first group of prosecutors who had left the case, they found the Brady. They were shocked, and they turned it over. Part of the credit as well, of course, goes to defense lawyers and the team that you've just been introduced to. But some of it took some sheer luck. Justice should not depend upon luck. You know, my conclusion of 44 years on the front line of trials is that we have the best system in the world. But it is dependent upon everyone doing their jobs. The defense lawyers, the prosecutors, the judges, and the police. It's like an engine to an automobile. One part breaks, and the whole system breaks down. There is so much work to be done. I'm sad to tell you, especially you young lawyers, that my generation of lawyers has fought injustice to a tie. We leave to you the responsibility for making it better, for fixing it. But I am hopeful because I find so many young people dedicating their careers or parts of their careers to making a difference. I've been pleasantly surprised to see that we have many heroes in the law. We sometimes don't recognize them, but we have them. I see them all around. Many are here tonight. There's many that work for the Constitution Project that dedicate their time and their energy, part of their careers or their whole careers, to protecting the Constitution. This group is defending the Constitution by working hard to have legislation on the Brady rule. It's been a failed rule, as Michele has suggested. We've been haunted by it for decades, because the whole decision about what is Brady rests in the hands of your adversary. And it takes a real man and a real woman to look at a piece of evidence and hand it over to your adversary. I see heroes in the law firms who today authorize the spending of millions of dollars worth of free legal time by young lawyers so that they can rectify unjust conviction. I see people like Barry Scheck, Peter Neufeld, who founded the Innocence Project, and have fought to release more than 311 of our citizens who didn't belong in jail. 300. Are there 10 times 300 that they haven't found and got released in these battles that they fight? Could there be 100 times 300 innocent people in our jails? That process, that fight that the Innocent Project conducts, has taught us all the frightening implications of the innocent being convicted. There are heroes among prosecutors too. We must never think that it's filled with bad people who try to skew the system just to get a win. Most are good, honorable people, our friends, our classmates. But even a few can wreak havoc on our system and destroy lives. Hank Schulke and Bill Shields, that took part of their life to write a 500-page report, are heroes in the law. I urge every young lawyer who enters a criminal courtroom to read it. It's more valuable than every criminal text you've ever seen because it's an anatomy of mistakes, an anatomy of dishonest decisions made by the government. You have no hope of catching them unless you learn how they do it. And it's set out in that report because Judge Sullivan commissioned their effort to do the report. We should all use what we learned in the Stevens case to become better lawyers. There is no greater responsibility one can shoulder than defending a person in our criminal system. It takes courage, it takes determination, it takes a team of brilliant lawyers, it takes something more too. You have to hate injustice to put yourself through that kind of turmoil, defending a citizen in the criminal courtroom. It was said about the legendary Clarence Darrow that he had the capability to sense injustice. It was described as a rudimentary anger, a capacity to muster all of one's power and to assert it against what one experiences as unfair. So I say to all of you, my colleagues who have been fighting decades like Michele and I and others here in this room, keep fighting. Be a hero.